The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP at 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you end up using any content. If you care to, you can send us letters at our new address, which is The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina 28816. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop. This week, we had the opportunity to interview Isabel and Christopher, who are active in differing ways in the No NEXUS Oberlin campaign, an anti-pipeline push in Oberlin, Ohio. This campaign is based in part around the college which exists there, but is also in strong coalition with non-college attending community members in the area who have been battling extraction for years. But first, before the interview, much love to those who are fighting fascism in Portland, the Bay, Charlottesville, D.C., and Boston this month. The police have again shown that they are firmly on the side of white nationalists, as they have countless times before, where in Portland only a few centimeters of helmet saved the life of an anti-fascist from a so-called non-lethal police weapon. Stay safe out there, and again, love from us. Before the interview, though, here are two short pieces of audio. The first is from Kevin Rashid Johnson, who in this run-up to the August 21st through September 9th prison strike has been experiencing targeted and vicious harassment from the places in which he is being forced to be incarcerated. So stay tuned for Kevin Rashid Johnson.
This is Kevin Rashid Johnson. I'm speaking in the interest of the upcoming prisoner strike set to begin August 21st, set to carry on until September the 9th, by prisoners across the nation who are challenging and coming out in opposition to conditions of social injustice, abuse, extensive deprivation of basic rights and necessities, and the general injustices and inhumanities of what today is the largest prison system in the world, the United States. We call on the general public to give as much support for this struggle and all of those who possibly can to engage and join in this struggle, because slavery has not been abolished. And this is only a continuation of the struggle to abolish slavery in America. And we need all possible support and all possible involvement. All power to the people.
Well, I was just recently returned back to Virginia from Florida, and that was in response to some of the challenges we were making down there to the conditions and generally slave labor, the exploitation of the prisoners down there through price gouging in the commissary and the packaging services, and they were trying to reinstate the good time and parole that were taken in exchange for over sentencing credits or time credits. And that was something that was initiated under the Operation Push in January of this year, where there was a work strike and a commissary strike. And based on some of the organizing that was going on and the conditions we were challenging there with respect to some of the abuses at the institutions I was at, which was Santa Rosa, where guards were systemically involved in manipulating prisoners and violent clashes with each other. And some of the abuses that were coming out of the institution that I was publicizing through articles contacted Virginia, told Virginia to come get me. They gave them an ultimatum. I think they contacted them on the 10th of June and told them to have me out of there by the 15th. So they ended up flying me back to Virginia on the 12th. And I was returned to Red Onion. Following which they transferred me from Red Onion to Sussex 1 and have confined me now to a permanent solitary confinement status without any real valid justification. It's pretty much in response to a lot of the exposure that I've been involved in with relation to prison abuses and inhumane conditions in the institution. So that's pretty much my situation right now. I'd really like to see as much support as possible being given to the series of struggles that are taking place, across the country, challenging the slave labor in the prison and abuses in the institution, those things. That's really what I'd like to see much of the focus on is what I would call research movement challenging both prison abuses and the ongoing conditions of slave labor in America. However much attention we can bring outside exposure to these prevailing conditions, I think that would build strong support and alliances, which would not only bolster the prison's activism on the inside, but would also bring to the public consciousness that there are some extremely oppressive conditions existing within the condition of confinement in America that really need to be addressed.
And here's a piece of audio concerning an upcoming fundraiser for anarchist prisoner Eric King.
Hey y'all, Jane from the Eric King support crew here. Just wanted to shout out a fundraiser we have going for political prisoner Eric King's partner, who was recently diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Their family has fallen on hard times, and she maintains the most visits and closest relationship and support for our friend and comrade. Of course, her value is not qualified by her relationship to Eric, but needless to say, if he was not incarcerated, this would be a different situation. For our folks inside, their families can help to maintain their connection to the outside world, make them feel loved, supported, and not forgotten, as well as amplify their voices. This new health problem will financially destabilize the family and directly impact her capacity to do those things, as well as care for her children. So if you're able, please visit the GoFundMe page, and better yet, send it along to family, friends, or capitalists who may be able to help out. Thanks for your continued support, and as always, until all are free.
So the first question that I have for y'all is, will you say your name or any name or no name that you want to go by for the purposes of this interview, and talk a little bit about yourselves and what you do?
My name is Isabel, and I'm going into my second year at Oberlin College.
My name is Christopher. I just graduated from Oberlin College with an environmental studies degree. And so I'm less active in No NEXUS Oberlin right now, although still trying to support from afar. And I'm now living in Austin.
Excellent. And Oberlin College, where is it for people who don't know?
Oberlin College is located in Oberlin, Ohio, which is northeast Ohio.
Would you, since we're here to talk about No NEXUS Oberlin, maybe we should start with talking about a bit about what the project is and like how it came to be and the thinking that went into its formation?
Yeah, so I can take that one. No NEXUS Oberlin is kind of the most recent iteration of several years of students collaborating with residents from around Ohio who were fighting not just this pipeline, but fighting fracking, fighting different instances of corporate domination in their communities, and trying to oppose these unwanted corporate projects, mostly fracking, but also other kinds of fossil fuel infrastructure, through different means, through direct action, through this method called Community Bill of Rights, to oppose these kinds of projects and affirm community self-governance. So there's several years of history of students trying to work with these community members and support through ways like offering direct action support and direct action trainings. And No NEXUS Oberlin kind of was formed as the NEXUS Pipeline project, which is one of the most horrific the fossil fuel empire encroaching on these rural Ohio communities. So No NEXUS Oberlin was arising in response to the NEXUS Pipeline project, which is originally owned by Spectra, now by Enbridge, to support existing opposition to NEXUS, but also to move NEXUS opposition to more of a climate justice framework and to use more direct action tactics. You know, a lot of students and community members were seeing hopelessness in these communities that had spent years trying to oppose NEXUS in the courts or through just submitting comments to FERC. And so No NEXUS Oberlin kind of arose to try and instill hope and talk about remaining options on the table now that, you know, everything, all the options were kind of over with in the courts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And I really connected with what you were saying about hope sort of being lost in the face of like a predatory and weird, you know, so-called justice system, and direct action being something that battled that. And it's really, really cool. Isabel, as somebody who is still there at Oberlin currently, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think like continuing on that train of thought of just trying to find hope when you've exhausted all options within the legal system. We've been focusing a lot on just trying to cultivate our empathy and cultivate our emotions in a way that is really just community focused, if that makes sense, which is, I think, also just directly aligned with trying to get that hope back.
Definitely. And like, how can you talk a little bit about how sort of the proposal of direct action was either met by those in the community or those in No NEXUS itself? Like, was direct action a tactic that made sense for the community around Oberlin College, or like was there some like sort of persuading that needed to happen?
I think that the Oberlin community is and surrounding area is a very interesting group of people, and I think there are a lot of people who are eager to participate in direct action, but also other people who are a little less comfortable with the idea of direct action. And so I think finding ways to keep to our own ideas of what direct action should be while also including everyone can sometimes be tricky. But Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's true. I think it's been a mix of responses. There were several people who we had been working with for a couple of years who approached us from the beginning and asked, can y'all help facilitate direct action trainings? Because a lot of these people are realizing that kind of coloring within the lines pipeline opposition isn't working and want these skills. So a lot of people came forward and asked for help, either organizing trainings or putting on direct actions. So a lot of people were very interested in that and interested in how they can create these kind of power shifts through direct action. But there was also a lot of other people who, you know, are maybe sympathetic to people trying to fight pipelines through the courts, but were upset about students or community members doing any kind of more confrontational types of action. So it's definitely a big mix of responses along, you know, political spectrums.
And I also thought that it was really great to feel that not only people were eager to learn about direct action and engage in it, but also other people from the greater community in Ohio and the surrounding areas were also eager to like help us and engage in it with their own knowledge.
And one thing I want to add is before even students really entered the picture with direct action against Nexus, there were already a number of community groups that were moving towards that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We got a lot of inspiration from I think it was an Ohio Community Rights Network action where they did like a creative street theater protest outside of a hearing because they were recognizing that these pipeline hearings were kind of a joke themselves and kind of a theater in of themselves. And so for everyone walking in, they had to pass this street theater that was kind of changing the narrative about what these hearings were and what the Community Rights Network was trying to do. So there were a lot of folks who were, moving in that direction before students ever got there.
Yeah, definitely.
And thanks for bringing that up too. So you've talked some about like what the community is like around Oberlin. I'm really curious to hear more about that, but also to hear like what kind of lands this pipeline is threatening. What are the human and non-human communities or like habitats around that area that would be affected by this pipeline?
Yeah. So the NEXUS Pipeline goes through Michigan and Ohio, and in a more physical sense, of course, tearing through and destroying a lot of lands that are farms, that are backyards. If you're driving on the highways in some counties in Ohio, it's really dramatic to see these like huge pipes. The pipe is 36 inches in diameter, and it goes for 250 miles, and they're just right in your face during construction and tearing through family homes and things like that. So literally in that way, that's what land is under attack. But of course, that has a lot of different implications in terms of the ecosystems and species living and growing, in terms of the health risks to people living near the pipeline and near the compressor stations in places like Medina. And of course, this land is also indigenous land under attack. So there are countless ways in which the pipeline is targeting land and people.
What are the indigenous groups that are in so-called Ohio?
Yeah, there are, of course, many tribes that are kind of native to the area, but I think there are people of like the Lenape tribe and Shawnee and many others.
There's no federally recognized
Yeah.
tribes that are currently through the area, and some of the kind of direct action support groups who've worked with us have encouraged us to do more of that research and reach out to First Nations in the area and connect to indigenous groups and figure out, kind of do more of our research and making those connections. So we're still working to do that some.
And I'd really love to talk about the like intersections that you've seen between decolonization and this particular anti-pipeline project a little bit later. But I'm curious because like there are so many anti-pipeline projects that are going on around the so-called US and so-called Canada. How do you, like if you had to describe this project to somebody who wasn't totally on board, what do you say to folks when you're doing like communication or outreach or stuff like that?
I think No NEXUS Oberlin is a coalition of primarily students, but also folks coming from very different backgrounds and very different types of education and types of political experience, who are wanting to move more from just conventional opposition to one pipeline project to a group that is committed to understanding the political systems, the power systems behind this pipeline, and how those systems of power are connected to other fossil fuel infrastructure projects, are connected to other types of injustices and oppression, and committed to understanding the sources behind Nexus, and also look toward and value a diversity of tactics to respond to any assaults from corporations on community sovereignty.
I would say, I think Chris really encapsulated that well. But yeah, doing all that we find we can in a really important moment that's part of a lot of different moments and part of like a greater web of times, and taking what we can do and making something meaningful out of it. I don't know.
It's such a complicated, I think that like one of the really exciting things for me right now is like how parallels are being drawn between other oppressions, like anti-black racism, anti-brown racism, a war against poor people, like the ongoing colonization and genocide of indigenous people. Like it's super, super cool to see as somebody, and this is something I'll probably cut out, but just like more conversational, but like I'm a little bit older than y'all, so like I grew up in a time when like the eco-justice community was super monolithic in a way, and very not up on its game as far as certain like oppressions and inclusions go. So it's really, really cool to see people of all ages, but like especially like younger folks, do the work to draw those parallels, because it is only going to make the struggle like for the earth better and against capitalism and all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. And I think like for me, it's so inherent in that struggle, and if you leave it out, you're just not addressing it in any way. And so there's no way to fight it without it.
Yeah, I was just going to give an example because I want to emphasize this is something that the group's trying to move toward. And, you know, we have definitely had a history of, just like any or most environmental groups had a history of like not focusing enough on the intersectionality between different kinds of oppression and between fracking projects and other types of oppression. And there have just been several moments in the past several years that have kind of been like a wake-up call to focus more on those things. Like before No NEXUS Oberlin, previous student group, Oberlin Anti-Frack was working with some groups in Youngstown, Ohio, trying to support them in opposing injection wells and fracking in their community. And I believe it was an injection well that was containing a lot of very toxic fracking waste and spilled into a lake and just devastated that water body. And there were like all kinds of horrendous chemicals in the water and dead fish. And either the state or the company flew in incarcerated folks from, I think, like Florida or Georgia, and had like a prison labor task force cleaning up this toxic spill without any protection. They were just like teams together cleaning up this like clearly very dangerous toxic spill. And so, you know, there's just been some kind of in your face moments like that that have forced the group and others to consider confronting some of the kind of like not in my backyard mindset that is kind of common around these areas, and are having the conversations and taking action in a way that's more aware of intersectional oppression and intersectional movements.
Thank you so much for bringing up the issue of prison/slave labor for doing some of the most dangerous environmental sort of cleanup and firefighting jobs. You know, that's a super huge parallel as well. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. To move on a little bit, it was cool for me to learn about y'all's group because of the cooperation that I saw in y'all's media about cooperation like with the community between the student body. And I'd love to hear a little bit about like what it's like to organize in a student setting and what kinds of solidarity, which you've talked about a little bit, come from the non-student community, and what kinds of like reception this project has gotten.
Yeah. So in general, organizing in this really interesting setting where we have college students and also community members that aren't directly affiliated with the college. Most of the students aren't from the community, aren't from the Oberlin community or greater Northeast Ohio community. And so we constantly try to think about that a lot in our positionality. And I think that comes up a lot when interacting with people that aren't directly part of the Oberlin College community. A lot of times people will say, you guys are just here for 4 years and you're going to leave, and this doesn't matter for you. And thinking about that and thinking about that a lot of people affiliated with the college have class privilege compared to the usually more poor rural communities around Oberlin. So thinking about our futures depending on the land versus the future of the community and what is going to happen after we leave is really important. And it's important to understand when we want to move forward in doing cooperative work. But yeah, I think we always have to keep that in mind, and we're never done working on that. And it's always a struggle. But on the other hand, we also have really found great support from community members as students, even though things aren't always 100% in line with what people want.
Like ideologically or tactically?
I think tactically.
Yeah.
I meant more tactically. In terms of like what we were talking about before with being comfortable with direct action or more confrontational things. But
if I could add something too, there had to have been a lot of learning moments like Isabel was talking about, recognizing kind of the privilege of mobility and of students, and the privilege of being able to leave after we graduate, and kind of also having to sometimes re-examine how we are perceived and acting accordingly, and making more intentional relationships with the community. For instance, when the city of Oberlin was considering a settlement package from the pipeline company, from Enbridge, students disrupted the city council's vote because it was looking like the city council was going to move forward accepting this settlement package, which a lot of people saw as kind of taking blood money from NEXUS and like relenting to them. And so students disrupted that vote and were holding up the vote, which a lot of folks from the community criticized, and that kind of hurt. Some people thought the relationship between students and the community, and whether or not that's true, that kind of made us reflect on how we could work with the community in more intentional ways and build a relationship. So we started doing things like we had like 2 or 3 potlucks, not pipelines events, because maybe it's not the best thing to meet community members who are coming from a kind of a different ideological place by being like, hey, we're going to have a like direct action 2.0 training right now. You know?
Yeah.
So we thought, like, what do folks around Ohio like? People like potlucks. So
Everyone loves potlucks.
so let's go to a field right by the easement where the NEXUS Pipeline is crossing through Oberlin, and have a big potluck where everyone brings food and have music and activities and speakers. And then after the potluck is over, go walk over to the easement and have like a planting where the ground is about to be broken by this horrendous death project.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of more palatable, intentional way of building relationships with the community, and kind of start introducing folks to thinking about direct action without just being like, hey, we're students and this is what we want to do, and we don't care if you're not comfortable with it, but we're going to do it.
Yeah, and just like jumping off of that to echo what you're saying, that really like the focus on trying to make organizing approachable and more accessible is really important in terms of including people who might be new to organizing in the community, but also important to maintain the relationships between organizers who are part of the community already and the rest of the community, and like making sure that we remember that we're not the only people in the movement who are working towards things.
Is there anything you would say to like any other students either at Oberlin or at other colleges who might be listening to this broadcast about like first steps that you would take if they wanted to do something like this on their campus or in their high school or middle school or whatever?
I think one thing that we repeatedly heard from like non-students in our area was, where were all of you before? And that's happened several times when students have, not just with NEXUS, but any direct action that students did in the community. I heard people say, where were you before? Like, I've never seen you do direct action for issues that affect the community when, the college is gentrifying the community. Like, where were you then? So I think it's really important to not just expect automatic support from non-students in your area, but to show up and be interested in the community around you and the problems that they're undergoing, and how you can offer resources and skills from academia and from a student base to build community with those around you and support them with what they need. And then when it comes to confronting a pipeline or an issue facing students, when you need to be building relationships and solidarity with people around you, you'll have those relationships to build off of.
Totally. Yeah. I think that in what you're saying about it's really important to like be interested in what the community is doing. If you're not already there before supporting the community in their needs, and then I think it's really important to examine what the purpose of your actions are and what the purpose of your group or your movement is, and maybe sitting down and thinking about that. I don't know.
Yeah. No, the question of being interested in other people, I think, is really, it helps people feel like they're not just your shock troops, or that you're not just like preaching to them, or because like maybe some folks like that, I know I don't really like feeling like I'm being used in a way, but I think that that's a really good point. Not that we should feign interest in the like interest of like political projects, but that we should like be interested in other people.
Yeah, and in the end, this is all about people and community anyway. Mm-hmm. So if that's not what you're doing, then what are you doing?
Yeah. And especially there's this, like, I can remember from the time when I was in college many years ago that there was this, like, kind of toxic relationship between campus populations and people who lived in the towns, as there's this, like, mutual kind of mistrust or, like, I don't even know, hatred is a little too strong a word, but, like, maybe mistrust is what I want to say. And I think breaking down that kind of pervasive toxic relationship and things like this is super key as well. And I think I see that happening with y'all as well.
And I also want to say, like, it's for other students or anyone getting started figuring this out, like, it's really scary to navigate how to start this kind of project. And it has taken this collective like several years to build these relationships and figure out how to facilitate actions and run campaigns and work with each other and not lose hope. And it took a lot of years of kind of sitting in a room being uncertain of what to do. So I think that the key thing is starting out with finding people who are organizing around you or people who are facing an issue around you and connecting with them and figuring out how to support them, and then identifying, what assaults on communities are happening in your community, and just use creativity to mobilize interest around you, because penetrating through people's apathy can be a task in of itself. And
Yeah.
one thing that our group has really been working harder to do and been succeeding in more in the last year is using creativity to engage people and tell people around us why this is such an urgent issue. And once that happens, you can have more people in a room that you can just talk with and share resources and ideas with and start building power.
Yeah, is that creativity in terms of like using tactics that employ like artistically creative elements, or like just being flexible in your understanding of approaches and stuff?
I think both. But when I was listening to Chris talk about creativity, my mind goes directly first to creativity and in terms of action, in terms of reaching out to people and finding creative ways to find common ground, and finding common ground in any way you can.
Like one example of both a direct action campaign and kind of outreach campaign that we were trying to help get off the ground was the #NoNEXUS campaign. That was an effort it was kind of a call to action and an effort to get people involved in supernatural and or spiritually themed actions and initiatives to be mobilized against the pipeline. And so that opened up a whole lot of room for creative, engaging things that caught people's interest, but not in a superficial way. Like, it was catching people's interest in a way that was meaningful and stuck out. And it also opened up room to get us to think about, connecting with faith-based communities and, that kind of spontaneous, wacky, creative, but also life-giving kind of thinking and how we approach actions also ended up driving us to connect with like faith and spiritual leaders in the community, saying like, want to start this supernatural and faith-based campaign, like, can we get the Holy Ghost on board? And it worked. And to the extent that even if the campaign didn't pick up as much as we were hoping to, it did connect us to people who saw something exciting and saw something out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and I think even if it didn't invigorate the Holy Ghost or other spirits as much as I wanted to, it definitely invigorated and energized the group to find something to put energy towards.
I love that. What was your favorite stunt that you'd care to mention about related to Haunt Nexus?
I think I would say the kind of final biggest action that the group was a part of, in which we and maybe a couple dozen students and a few non-students did a walk onto a construction site in Medina where there was trenching happening in the ground. So just these massive, deep cuts in the earth. And so there was a group of maybe a couple dozen people who descended upon the site as climate angels, intervening on behalf of divine forces in a death project. And we passed out flyers explaining like who the climate angels were and what this project was that we were intervening in, and tried to shut down construction on the site for as long as we could. That was a powerful thing, and kind of what we had in mind when we engaged in things like #HauntNexus or other creative, spontaneous, kind of weird action ideas, was that we saw so much hopelessness around us and so many people who were exhausted, who felt small in the face of not just Nexus, not just Enbridge, but the fossil fuel empire everywhere. Is that what was needed was a reminder that we are very powerful and people power is powerful, and sometimes you need a reminder of the like superhuman, supernatural capability of people kind of having hope against hope, harnessing what seems to be impossible powers in order to have the potential to overcome these things that seem like already over and done with.
I think my favorite, creative action that was taken was it was a little less of what I would consider direct. Actually, just kidding. Everything's direct action, but it was on the easement. This doesn't have to do with Haunt Nexus as much, but on the easement in Oberlin, there was a planting of a bleeding heart plant. Was my favorite creative action because it just really connected the moment to the land for me. And there was this little planting ceremony, and a plaque was put up that said how to take care of our bleeding heart plant, or Lamprocapnos spectabilis, the scientific name. It said, number 1, keep the soil consistently moist with regular watering at the base of the plant. Number 2, work in compost or mulch if desired. And then number 3, cease construction of the NEXUS Pipeline. We planted this beautiful bleeding heart native to Ohio as a symbol of our fight for life over destruction and death. The death of 3,200 acres of land, the deaths of countless people losing their lives to climate change, the deaths of those killed by expanded fracking and an increasingly toxic environment, and the deaths of our imaginations in a building of a livable world. Please don't break our hearts by undigging this bleeding heart plant for a massive fracked gas pipeline that attacks our collective chance for survival. Join us to defend life, defend community, and defend our futures. So that was the little framed plaque that was put next to the bleeding heart flower. And that was done before construction fully started on the Oberlin easement. So right now I'm not sure if that bleeding heart flower still exists.
That's really beautiful. Those both are like examples, I think, of like how direct action can be like fun and also deeply like touching in a way. I'd also really love to hear if you have any thoughts on the current wave of anti-pipeline and anti-extraction work which is being done, and how No NEXUS Oberlin fits into it, and like maybe more importantly, like what you see as the next steps.
I can start. I think No NEXUS Oberlin has absolutely been looking to other opposition campaigns, and especially anti-pipeline camps, from Standing Rock to Appalachians Against Pipelines, and the No Bayou Bridge Camp, and Lancaster Against Pipelines, both because of the creativity behind these campaigns, and also the ways that world building is occurring as a part of fighting these projects, that it's not just against the pipelines, but that these groups, especially, or most noticeably Standing Rock, there were, in these communities that were fighting pipelines, there's also the development of cooperative ways of living and people engaging in anti-capitalist modes of interacting with one another and subsisting in camps. And No NEXUS Oberlin isn't a camp, and it's a lot smaller than these other instances we've been seeing of anti-pipeline fights. But we've been looking to these other groups in these camps that aren't just focusing on fighting a pipeline or fighting a fossil fuel project, but are moving towards climate justice and moving towards a cooperative world and an anti-capitalist way of living through how they're engaging with one another and meeting others' needs, meeting their own needs, meeting others' needs, and expanding their imagination. So it's been really exciting for us to watch.
Yeah. And then in terms of kind of coming next for No NEXUS Oberlin, I think there's a lot of thinking we have to do, but I think supporting the groups that Christopher was talking about, and also continuing to take action in any ways we can in Oberlin and the surrounding area when it comes to Nexus, are two different kind of lines of thought, but are where we're going next.
That's all really real. And I liked the statement about No NEXUS Oberlin not necessarily fitting into the current mold of pipeline resistance, but it's definitely doing a bunch of work and is like definitely presenting another model for pipeline resistance, and I think that's really inspiring too.
Thanks.
The question of decolonization has been sort of woven into this entire interview, and as well as like analyses of anti-Black, anti-Brown, anti-Indigenous racism. Did y'all have anything else you wanted to say about that as it fits with this project?
I think, as we mentioned before, it's so interwoven in real life, and so that's why it's interwoven. And we try to address it as much as we can in everything that we're doing. Yeah, I think just making sure to center and focus on the voices that are organizing that are Black, Brown, and Indigenous, and working with people in those communities.
Yeah, I think this is something that maybe has been a part of the group's analysis for a while, but only recently have we started trying to really jump into action and putting those ideologies into practice by making connections with, other student organizations that are doing anti-racist work, or work for justice in Palestine, and meeting with and talking with those groups about how to collaborate, and then also recognizing folks in the community, groups like in Oberlin, the city of Oberlin had one of the first Indigenous Peoples Day to replace Columbus Day. And so there's a committee of mixed Indigenous and white settler folks that are kind of spearheading that and also doing other work for Indigenous folks in the community. So we develop relationships with them. And
and like at least we've been starting to try to more put resources and our own energy into the work that they're doing, whether it be Indigenous Peoples Day Committee in Oberlin or members associated with Cleveland or Oberlin AIM, and just showing up for their things as much as we would want anyone to show up for ours.
I was going to say another thing is, in talking about recognizing the structures of power and the people behind this pipeline, we have tried to study as much as possible Enbridge as a company, which is the parent company of NEXUS, and look at what other pipeline and destructive fossil fuel projects they're doing in other parts of the world, and their horrible, bloody track record of displacement projects through pipelines or otherwise in other areas, largely through Indigenous communities, and make those connections and understand those other projects, and hopefully in the future will be more active about developing relationships with other people who are also fighting Enbridge projects.
Yeah, Enbridge is definitely sort of a like beast that keeps rearing its head in these anti-pipeline fights.
Definitely. There have been, I think, records of spills that Enbridge has been responsible for since 2001. There are long lists that you can find, and they had a stake in the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the list goes on. But
yeah, it certainly does. How can people support No NEXUS Oberlin, and also how can people get in touch with y'all?
Yeah. So we're always really, really eager to just hear from anyone. So contact us. So people can support us by contacting us, and even just to learn about what No NEXUS Oberlin is doing, but also if anyone's interested in supporting in any way.
The folks can get in touch with No NEXUS Oberlin at NoNEXUS Oberlin at protonmail.com. We have a Facebook, facebook.com/NoNEXUS Oberlin, where we post things we've been involved in and things other folks around us are involved in. The project is mostly underway. It's well underway. So we're kind of in a stage where we're really trying to reassess what we're doing and where we can best spend our energies. But one thing we wanted to direct folks towards, one of the groups that we've worked with in the past, Sustainable Medina County, has a fundraiser for equipment to do air quality monitoring around a compressor station in Medina, because compressor stations are known to, by nature, leak massive amounts of toxins into the environment and threaten people's health and safety. So if people are interested in donating to NEXUS opposition, they can go to sustainablemedinacounty.org/donate and support air quality monitoring efforts. But like Isabel said, we also just really want to hear from anyone who is doing relevant work that we can support, or who has ideas for how we can collaborate. And we're always excited to hear from folks.
Yeah.
So is there anything that we missed in this conversation that you want to end on, or like any information that you want to impart?
I think we've talked about this before, but I just want to finish by letting folks know that we recently found out there has already been a spill of drilling fluid, 20,000 gallons of drilling fluid into the Maumee River tributary, and recognize all of the damage that has already been done by this disastrous project to land and to different species and to communities, but also recognize the incredible work that has been done by countless organized students and non-students and residents who've been holding on to hope and having their own fight, and both have room for grief for what's happened, but also appreciation for all of the folks who've been working for years on defending life and defending their communities against this evil project.
Yeah. I think I personally am really grateful for all of those people that can find that energy and hope to continue, because I think without that I wouldn't be able to. And so that's kind of a selfish thing to end off on, but just really grateful to have support and inspiration from other really amazing organizers that I see all over the world.
Isabel and Chris, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been really great getting to connect with you and hearing about what you're doing, and feel super inspired by the work that you're doing. So thanks again for coming onto the radio.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. And we think Nostra is awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And this will air on Sunday, so if you wanted to, I'm pretty sure it will air on Sunday. The light, the darkness, and the sun. To get in touch with this project, you can write them at No NEXUS Oberlin at protonmail.com, or search their name on Facebook, and Nexus is NEXUS. The music you are listening to now is Lobo Marino, and this track is typically heard at the end of each End of the Line episode, an ongoing podcast out of Richmond on fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline. If you want to hear more stories from the world of fighting the Mountain Valley and other similar pipelines, you can find them at pipelinepodcast.org. With